Russia's Chief of General Staff, Gerasimov, lies so brazenly about Russian successes that even ultranationalist military bloggers make fun of him. These false reports of success are probably responsible for thousands more Russian dead, says another military blogger. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are advancing further in Zaporizhia and increasing the pressure on the Russians. All of this and more will be covered in this situation report on the war in Ukraine. You can now save the most at Holy with my code. Russia declares that the attack on Moscow was a terrorist attack that targeted only civilian targets. So the oil targets and arms companies that were hit are obviously being ignored. However, according to Russian sources, there were actually 3 civilian fatalities. It is unclear here whether it was a weapon malfunction or if Russian jamming or spoofing was responsible, because the drones simply no longer knew where they were. However, Ukraine simply does not have enough standoff weapons for an attack on residential buildings to be explained in any reasonable way. Ukraine simply has nothing to spare for flying to Moscow and randomly attacking residential buildings there. If they wanted to do something like that, they would certainly attack Belgorod or cities nearby, but not lose many missiles on the way. However, these attacks were not the last, as further attacks are now being reported, including on Moscow. This time, however, I can't report any significant damage. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians have also hit a Russian drone and missile depot in Kherson. Explosions were visible there, the impact and subsequent secondary explosions, because obviously something was hit. The whole thing was geolocated here, that is, on the eastern, if you will, on the eastern land corridor into Crimea. We move on to the developments along the front, and there we have no reports from Sumy up here, nor from Kherson, Kharkiv, or Charkiw, neither from Vovchansk nor from Veliki Burluk. At Kupiansk, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports that the Russians are advancing west of Kupiansk toward Shevchenkove. Just to clarify, Kupiansk is here. And here is Shevchenkove, so, west of it, the Russians are advancing in that direction. That has nothing to do with reality at all. For comparison, let's look at 2 pro-Russian maps. On the one hand, we have the pro-Russian Suryak, who shows Kupiansk here and Shevchenkove here. We can now, with a lot of goodwill, say, okay, maybe there was an advance somewhere here near Kindrashivka that the Russian side believes happened. As I said, that's Suryak. And Krymikapris is also pro-Russian, but he works with geolocation. With Krymikapris, every single infiltration is counted as an advance. Even where people work based on facts, but interpret them as generously as possible, even there it's not apparent that any advance toward Shevchenkove or even west of Kupiansk is happening. That's simply absurd. In fact, there was an infiltration north of Kupiansk. We can see it here. Here is a Russian soldier in this cemetery. He was killed by a Ukrainian FPV drone, and that would in turn mean that, at least when it comes to infiltrations, the Russians were active in this area here, which is a region the Ukrainians claim to have liberated. In the recent situation reports, we've repeatedly mentioned that the Ukrainians are reporting increased Russian activity and that the Russians are carrying out more infiltrations. Pressure from the north on Kupiansk would also increase, indicating this. Infiltration refers to individual soldiers breaking through and trying to establish themselves in the rear area. And since we have a video recording here showing how the soldier in question was killed, we can't conclude from that the front has shifted in any way, but it does show activity in that direction. Further south, towards Bohova, we again have the Russian Ministry of Defense, which also claims here that they have already taken Bohova. A Russian mill blogger here, says that not even any pro-Russian map would claim this. And he then concludes sarcastically, according to these reports, we will probably capture Kharkiv soon, making fun of the fact that the Russian General Staff claims they have already captured Bohova. If we look at the pro-Russian Telegram channel Reba, the Russian mill blogger Reba, it is now being claimed there that Russian forces are approaching Bohova, which are probably infiltrations. But even Reba does not claim that Bohova has been taken. If we look at the map, it shows that they are moving towards Bohova. I haven't seen any geolocation for this yet, which doesn't necessarily mean anything. But even there, they are not claiming that Bohova has already been taken. And also interesting, we can see Ukrainian counterattacks at various points here. That means, in all likelihood, the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians back at least locally. But here, at least, I have not yet confirmed the claim that the Russians have gotten closer to Bohova in this direction. But it's clear that Bohova has not yet been taken. South of there, towards Lyman, I can't see any changes. And towards Slovyansk, we have a Russian infiltration west of Kaliniki. That's up here. And if we look at it on the map, it's not particularly spectacular, but still, of course, at a new position. It's here. That means the eastern part of Kaliniki is probably under Russian control. Accordingly, a Russian soldier would have advanced about 3 kilometers to the west here before being engaged by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians also say that the Russians are increasing the intensity of their attacks towards Slovyansk. We've talked here repeatedly about the various indications that the Russians are sending reinforcements horizontally, meaning along the front, to capture the rest of the Donbass. Troops are being withdrawn from other parts of the front. Recently, for example, images have surfaced of Marines who were previously near Sumy and are now fighting here at Pokrovsk. The Russian objective is likely to be to capture the fortress belt of Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka. And according to reports, this is supposed to be firmly planned for this year. And accordingly, they are now moving more soldiers there to achieve success. And at least the infiltration attempts are producing only very small, slow gains. The main focus is clearly in this direction, and by concentrating their efforts, the Russians can at least slowly advance through infiltration. I can't see any changes toward Kostiantynivka itself. We don't see anything toward Dobropilya either. Same for Pokrovsk, Mishova, Ulyalpol. Further down, I don't see that anything has really changed. However, toward Orikhiv, we have an interesting development, because Ukrainian offensive activity is increasing there. Here, we have Ryba writing. The situation in western Zaporizhzhia remains tense. The Ukrainian armed forces are increasing their presence in Stepnohirsk. According to footage on the channel of Dmitry Rogozin, firefights with small arms are taking place south of the northern high-rise block. The enemy is effectively breaking through the defensive positions within the city limits. According to our information, the situation in the east has significantly worsened. The Ukrainian armed forces are attacking near Sherbaki and towards Pyatichatiki, and fighting continues in the area around Stepovoye. So basically, the Russians are reporting that here, whether it's Zaporizhzhia or Orikhiv, attacks are taking place along this line here, and the situation for the Russians is continuously deteriorating, while the Ukrainians are slowly making gains. That's it for the changes along the front. We see that in various areas the Ukrainians have taken the initiative. In this area here, we have Ukrainian control. If we roughly summarize it by color, we can use blue here. Ukraine has the initiative here and here. Here it is probably contested. And the Russian initiative was most recently at Huliaipol, and along this axis here. We now have Russian activity here again, and as I said, up here it is contested. Russia may have the initiative here, or maybe not yet. That is a bit unclear at this point. But this shows that the situation has noticeably changed to some extent, that the Russians no longer have the strategic initiative, that they are maintaining pressure on every part of the front, but overall, it is now dramatically more difficult for them to advance. Once again, the Russian military has claimed gains that do not exist. According to Russian military bloggers, the practice of claiming gains on credit has happened again. That's what they call the practice of reporting certain territory that they haven't actually occupied. Last year, this would have cost thousands of soldiers' lives. Here, we have one of the Russian military bloggers. This is an older post from January, but it's relevant to this topic. Oleg Sivka was reported as captured in the summer. I'm sure you remember how many months later we actually took it. Hopefully we managed to take it in October, because even the second captured is in quotation marks. That means even there, they're not sure. Toretsk was declared captured in the winter, but the fighting there continued until spring. The enemy was within the city limits, and we received the order to clear the city. Kupiansk. Who knows how many times it has already been captured? Spring, summer, fall. Every time new reports, But in reality, it's still there, block by block. Vovchansk was captured in the summer and then cleared. The fighting never stopped. Siversk was reported as fully under control in the fall. Meanwhile, we received reports of fighting on the outskirts and within the city limits. In Pokrovsk, there was an incursion in the fall, more precisely into the suburbs, because of logistics and unstable control. Chasiv-Chasivya was either captured or cleared throughout the year. The city remained an active combat zone for a long time, and these are just the relatively large cities. Let's not even talk about the actual small towns. There are dozens of them. If these were just nice reports for the leadership, they might not say a word about it. But since we are then sent out, meaning us, the Russian soldiers, to carry out what they have already put in writing, and the enemy knows this exactly, these losses are simply brutal. That's exactly why we are so alert, because thanks to these scribblers in their cozy offices, the losses are much higher than they would have been otherwise. He says the Ukrainians know that village XY has been reported as captured, and that's why the Russian officers have to actually take it as quickly as possible. So that lets the Ukrainians know where the Russians are concentrating their forces and then causes heavy losses. But why all this? Why is there such systematic lying? A Russian mill blogger answered that a year ago. At the front, it's common to report areas as captured only in reports, without actually controlling them. The command is entitled to money and awards for advancing, so there's a strong temptation to claim captured areas early, even if assault troops won't actually move in until tomorrow, to benefit from that, to include it, while the assault troops won't actually move in until tomorrow. Is that the area still has to be captured later and the assault troops advance. But if the area has already been captured, how are you supposed to use artillery and air power against it? So how can you ask for support if it's already marked on the maps as being under Russian control? And so the assault troops advance without artillery support. Something similar happened yesterday as well. As I said, the report is also a bit older. It's from last year, when the command of the 11th Brigade captured a dam on credit, over which the enemy advanced into our rear as if on a highway. By the way, the tanks were intercepted at the exit without paratroopers. The brigade commander of the 11th Brigade, was reportedly already relieved of duty according to rumors. He may now be promoted according to our tradition. This is not a joke. Here, it is common to send the unfit on vacation, and then appoint them again. In extreme cases, they are sent to the Frunze Academy, which is the Russian military academy, to teach there. And the new brigade commander will consider how he can disrupt the enemy's supply at Sucha under the new conditions. I hope he really gets the job done and not just on credit. And speaking of credit, did you know that loans can become more expensive if banks get data that makes them judge your willingness or ability to repay those loans to be low? You can prevent this by having such data deleted, and that's possible with today's sponsor. If you hate unwanted emails and calls as much as I do, today's video sponsor can help you. Incogni has a very simple business model. For a small fee, our data is deleted from the internet. There are tons of free offers on the internet that we accept, even though we know the saying, if we don't pay for the product, then we are the product. All these websites and apps either show us ads or collect our personal data and then sell it to data brokers. That's not just our email addresses and names, but often also our date of birth, home addresses, shopping and browsing behavior. Every search query, every product we look at can be tracked after all. These data can then be used for spam, but also by companies when it comes to insurance premiums or loans. Insurance can become more expensive. Loans can be denied because you appear unreliable or careless due to visiting certain websites or specific searches on the internet. Incogni is here to prevent that. Basically, it ensures that we don't have to pay all the costs for what we use for free on the internet. You sign up, give the company permission to act on your behalf, and they immediately start working to delete your data. I can track the progress directly, and with every visit, I get confirmation of more deleted entries. If the brokers cause any problems, Incogni keeps at it until my data is gone. Month after month, they continue to protect my privacy. If you also want to take back your privacy, you'll find the link in the description. Not only will you be supporting the channel, but you'll also get a 60% discount when you use my link. I now have an annual subscription myself so that my data is continuously deleted. At the same time, I'm grateful that you're supporting the channel, but let's get back to the video. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians report that the Russians are professionalizing the use of gas pipelines. We had just talked about Sucha, meaning the Ukrainian incursion into Russia. And that was one of the earlier examples where tunnels were used. This had already happened in the Donbass in previous years, but in Sucha, it was definitely a gas pipeline. Now, it's being professionalized. The Ukrainians report that this is being used both for infiltration and for logistics. The Russians have even set up a special training camp for this, which shows how extensively they want to use pipelines, that they want to train people specifically for this purpose. Ukrainians say pipelines are being fitted with telephone connections. So cables are being laid, either to establish these telephone connections, or probably also to be able to communicate within them. And where pipelines are damaged, tunnels are dug around the damaged sections so that they can be used again afterward. We also have news regarding partisans and sabotage. The FSB says it has arrested 37 people accused of setting fires on Ukraine's behalf. For example, we keep seeing videos where, for instance, control panels or switching stations, the electronic controls, are set on fire. Here are some other examples they mention, but in general, it's an easy way to carry out sabotage. And here it says they were recruited through social media. This is a practice that the Russians have repeatedly carried out in recent years. We see here that at least the Russians are saying the Ukrainians have now started doing it as well. Meanwhile, the SBU reports the arrest of a Russian agent in Dnipro who helped the Russians with target designation and fire control. And a Ukrainian woman who did this for the Russians has just been sentenced to 15 years in prison in Ukraine. She too had, of course, been arrested earlier as well. Since 2023, Russia has naturalized 39,000 people who were granted citizenship because of their service in the armed forces. So we see that since 2023, the Russians have been able to recruit 39,000 people and add them to their own armed forces. In large part, these are probably not the more prominent examples from Africa or India, but rather many of these people are likely to come from the former Soviet republics. We have repeatedly seen examples of this, such as Tajiks, Uzbeks, or similar groups serving in the Russian armed forces. And these people are likely to be at least partly from such backgrounds. There are reports from Ukraine. Ukraine has developed a glide bomb. It has a 250-kilogram warhead, and it is said to have a range of dozens of kilometers. How far exactly is unclear. It seems, at least that's how it appears here, that it does not have its own propulsion, which means that the range depends largely on the altitude and speed at which it was dropped. At least to me, it doesn't clearly look like a jet engine, even though it could theoretically be one, but I haven't read anything about that. The important thing here is that Ukraine developed it themselves, and 250 kilograms is relatively small. That is probably intended so that more of them can be carried. And if they are precise enough, we've talked about this in the past. If a weapon is really precise, it also needs less explosive power, because in most cases, the larger explosive charge is supposed to compensate for not hitting the target exactly. But with a direct hit, sometimes just a few kilograms are enough. So 250 kilograms is a good number if you can be reasonably confident that you're hitting the target pretty accurately. But that also means, of course, that you can carry more on board an aircraft. The mission will certainly be carried out by Sukhoi 27 and MiG-29. The test here is being carried out by a Sukhoi 24Me. But the actual combat mission is more likely to be carried out by the two fighter jets, because there are probably only about 12 to 15 Sukhoi 24s in service, and it is needed for the deployment of cruise missiles. So it's unlikely that it will be used for that. At the same time, the Ukrainians report that they are now protecting almost 1,200 kilometers of their national territory with such drone nets. These are, of course, not 100% protection, but they reduce the likelihood that drones can cause damage to vehicles. And there, the Ukrainians, in this case represented by the Minister of Defense, report that they have now covered almost 1,200 kilometers with it. And that's it for today's situation report. If you liked it, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. That helps me with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have anything to add. And if you're new here, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and click the bell. On Wednesday, next Wednesday at 8 p.m. German time, is the next live stream with a situation report on the Ukraine war. We will also address the situation in the Persian Gulf again. And if you have questions, there will be a Q&A session afterwards where you can ask your questions. That's it from my side for now. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you soon. At this point, I would also like to give special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamuri, as well as to Lieutenant Jans vom Eck, Uwe de Vren, nicknamed Tabib, Karsten Schultz, Robert Veal, Vision, Soundlab, Lick Chatter, NTX, Malermeister Noggle, Marcus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Best, Sickwriter 666, Sickwriter 666, Muta 1000 Yanis Gu, Sasha Müller, Cunningham, Stress. Thank you very much. Without you, this would not be possible.